Welcome, everyone, to the Trailblazing Leaders podcast. It is my promise to you to bring exceptional guests who have demonstrated a passion for talent development and the impact it has on business growth. With my guests, we're going to be discussing a range of leadership topics from the art of performance of teams and compassionate coaching all the way to driving significant culture change. We're going to have the privilege to hear some compelling stories about innovative practices and learn about the transformative ideas of our guests. And if you stay with me to the end, I'll be sharing a special gift with all of our audience. I have the honor today to introduce a very special guest who I'm privileged to be able to call also a friend, Andre Caraco. He brings over 30 years of experience in strategy and branding and marketing and crisis management working for Sony. He was named the co-president of global marketing at Sony as part of their globalization efforts within their marketing department. During his tenure, Andre has had incredible successes with the franchises, including Spider-Man, Jumanji, The Da Vinci Code, and James Bond. He's been involved in the marketing of Academy Award-winning films such as The Social Network, Zero Dark 30, Spider-Man. And what's incredible is under his leadership, he revived several of these beloved franchises, not only 3 iterations of Spider-Man and 2 iterations of Jumanji, but my favorite, the reinvigoration of 007, the franchise with Daniel Craig, and Skyfall, which was one of the highest grossing films at $1.1 billion. Andre left Sony and exited his role in 2020. After being the co-marketing president. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Southern California in film production. He is also a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He has made a career pivot, and he is now doing production of major films and has projects underway, and is with much privilege and much honor that I am here to welcome my guest, Andre Caraco. So, Andre, how about we get into the very first question of every podcast?
Hi, yeah.
Tell me about your leadership beliefs.
Let's do it. Thank you so much. You make me sound like such a big deal. It's embarrassing. It's like, but I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
Yeah. So, in no short order, I have a number of leadership beliefs and a bunch of bullet points, but I'll boil them down to the sort of poetic essentials of what really has worked for me over the years. And being in the communication business, I'd say sort of at the top of the list is clear communication. I think that is critical for any leader to be able to clarify their ideas, their intent. With that comes a sense of self-awareness and emotional sort of intelligence. I think that's critical for leaders to really excel. At least for me, it has worked to be able to understand sort of my own sort of emotional well-being and self-awareness, as well as those and points of views of others. Certainly with that comes an ability to, to listen. I think listening is a skill set that is sometimes not necessarily applied as best it can be. I've been guilty myself of sort of over talking and over communicating, thinking, my voice is the one that matters most in the room, when that's not always the case. And listening really allows a great deal of opportunity to come to the forefront in terms of creativity and integrity and so on and so forth. Of course, we talk about it a lot, but diversity really does matter at reflecting the world we live in. I think it's not only good for business, it's the right thing to do. And so reflecting that in my leadership has been a joy. In fact, at Sony, we were able to develop an intersectional team that really specifically works on marketing to underprivileged or teams that, rather communities that are not necessarily reached as frequently as the overarching consumer. Things like that. Respect, obviously, collaboration is critical, finding ways to collaborate with my colleagues horizontally, and then of course leading a team with collaboration and creating an environment where employees and teams feel safe to, as I like to say, dare to suck. Really, just it's okay to throw out a idea when you create the freedom for that to take place. Sometimes those ideas turn into the best ideas that transform a campaign. So those are some of the things I think about
I,
in
I,
terms of.
I love them. I want to unpack, I hate to use that expression, but I just will unpack a few of those ideas. One is, how do you listen? I think that's such an interesting point. I know I'm guilty of the same thing. My voice matters, but what is the practice you bring to yourself to be a good listener? How do you do that?
I actually have had to train myself because sometimes when you're in a big room, your brain goes naturally to, it's like I meditate. So when I try to meditate, sometimes I'm thinking about like I've got to pick up my dry cleaning and I have to walk the dogs and brush my teeth. But, listening requires you to really zero in and on focus on the intention of the person who is speaking. And it takes grace and it takes, it's a skill set, and I think it's important to develop that to really be able to tune out what's going on in the room, whether it's someone's tapping on their computer or whatever it is, and be able to focus on what someone is saying, how they're communicating it, what is their emotional resonance when they're communicating idea, gives me an indication of how to respond and engage with someone. So I'm not sure if that completely answers the question, but that's sort of.
No, I think it's almost like the leader has to realize that they're at a point in time a therapist that has to be actively listening and watching at everything and separate themselves out, which is not an easy art for most leaders who are D-oriented, driven, my idea is the right idea. And so I do appreciate the fact it is a practice skill.
It is, and I'd say to add a sort of a punctuate that a little bit is another thing that I didn't mention, but I think it's important to allow for levity and humor to be part of leadership, and that allows the listening to sort of uh, uh, manifest a little better for me anyway. That doesn't, obviously you need to be appropriate in the work environment, but where you can create that comfort level, it's easier to listen to people when people feel that they are being listened to wholeheartedly by the entire team and create that listening in sort of a 360 way in a room.
Yeah, so I just came back from a conference where they had a neuroscientist talk about trust and that in our brain, trust starts to be built when I feel safe, and humor is one of the best ways to start the trusting aspect of a relationship. And
Absolutely agree with that.
it's so primitive, but being able to put a smile on someone else's face allows that to begin.
And to
I
do,
also
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I was just going to
No.
say also it can really diffuse conflict or discomfort in a room when a team member or a leader themselves is feeling, okay, this is an impasse. We're at a pain point in the conversation. That sense of levity and humor reminds us all that we're all just human and we're all working towards the same goal of sort of trying to, in my case, lift a movie campaign to its potential.
Yes, and it's very interesting. You work with such big dollars and such important impacts on the business, but in the end, we didn't save. You and I don't save lives. As marketers, we don't save lives, and so there always is a place for levity. Unlike others who are literally on the front line, it is dollars, so it's there. I want to come back to this aspect of trust, but importance, what you call safety for an idea to suck. So how did you manifest that? Because I assume you have incredibly bright teams, the best in the business. How did you make it safe to suck?
When you have a team that consists of creatives and publicity executives and digital marketing rock stars and media folk and strategists and research teams and all of those and intersectional experts as well, that is a diverse group of people with different points of view who are coming to the game sort of through their lens. And so when you get everyone on the same page of, okay, this is a safe room, we're going to have fun. Let's make this joyful and see what can come of it. And I think you said it, and you're exactly right. We're not doctors. We aren't saving lives. The movie business and marketing is such a creative space. And while ego gets in the way, and everybody's got one, including me, and all of that, when you create a space for people to say, "All right, you know what? He made it safe for me to say what I'm thinking, but I kind of am afraid to say." when you take away that veil and someone has the freedom to say, okay, I'm going to throw out my idea, and they do, you applaud them. You get right on, Bob. That was an excellent idea, and we're going to make it better because Sandy has a way to complement what you just said, and she's going to take a kernel of your truth and add on to that, and then sooner or later, 9 times out of 10, you left that room with like a roadmap to sort of maybe a campaign initiative, a tactic, whatever, what have you. But I think sort of stating it and even being part and parcel of it and saying, you know what, I'm the leader in this room. I have a idea. Let me throw it out. I'm going to dare to suck. Tell me what you think, and cross my fingers and hope that it lands. And if it doesn't, that's okay too.
So I'm going to ask for a story in this. Did you start your meetings and set the tone when we were having these important brainstorm meetings? Say, hey guys, let me just set the agenda or set the tone. That this is a safe place. Was that how you would begin a meeting? Or could you tell me a story about, hey, when you used that methodology, what resulted from it?
Okay. So, well, let me give you one example. A few years back, as you'll recall, there was a movie called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that Quentin Tarantino directed, with arguably the 2 biggest stars in the world, Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. And so that was a huge opportunity for everyone in town, and certainly Sony. We ultimately end up getting the business, which was an extraordinary feather in Sony's cap, and I'll bet you anything he's going to make his next movie with them. And so Godspeed. I hope that happens. But what we needed to do was figure out what is the best way to get everybody in a room that is a stakeholder, whether it's, all the teams that are going to have a place to present a position that is going to speak to Quentin Tarantino, who's a brilliant auteur who has a very specific idea in this title, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, none of which we had read the script, but we had, some of us, but most people in the room did not have the privilege of reading the script. And we had to really invent a strategy to get the business. And that meant getting everyone in a room and creating a template for him to leave the room saying, Sony's my home. Sony is the place that I want to make this movie. And we were up against all the other studios in town, as you could imagine, who were willing to underwrite this extraordinary production and his 9th film. So creative, publicity, digital, media, all of those folks were going to have a say. Music team, Sony Music obviously was going to be involved, and it was really going to be sort of a 360 under the Sony umbrella of folks that were going to have to tap into this feature because it was so important to us. And so that meant designing the room a certain way. Well, the creatives had a point of view. The music folks had a point of view. The publicity team had a point of view. But we were sort of like grabbing at straws because only a handful of people had read the script. And we had to speak to Quentin in a way that he was going to say, I understand that they get me. They really get me. And so people dared to suck by way of saying, well, what if we play these songs that Quentin grew up with? And so that person went down the rabbit hole, and we started listening to music in the room. And we started saying, okay, you're the music expert. We don't know ultimately what he's going to have in the movie. It's early days. We just hope to get this business. But so we would workshop, and people would throw out musical cues, and it was sort of that fun environment. The publicity people were talking about, oh, the film festivals, is this a Cannes Film Festival opportunity? You're putting the cart before the horse. Ultimately, we ended up going to the Cannes Film Festival, which was a risk in and of itself because the movie didn't come out for 2 or 3 months later. And so, that's a big risk. So to enter into a conversation talking about film festivals with Quentin Tarantino when we don't know, the day one of shooting has not happened, you're kind of putting yourself out on a limb. Of course, the creatives had a point of view, again, is sort of empowered by some of us that had read the script, but it was a crapshoot. But anyway, the long story longer is just to say that everyone came and put their game face on and said, I'm not sure if this is going to work. Let's figure it out. Let's workshop it with the people who have read the script and come to a conclusion that feels like, okay, he's going to walk into this room. He's going to see every digital board covered with art from the 60s and 70s of that era that was about the movie business. I mean, he made a movie where a lot of it is two guys talking, but it's taking place on sets of movies. We had to get really creative about like creating that environment, even having inspiration from the era of advertising at the time. You know, you're a Mad Men yourself, you know, yes. Coca-Cola and all the brands. What did they look like in the late 60s, right? Yes. At the turn of a critical moment in the movie business when things were really shifting from the late 60s into the 70s, the cultural revolution. How do we explore the cultural moment that was happening in the world that Quentin's going to walk in and say, oh, okay, they get it. They are paying attention to what matters to me. And so it was a dynamic setting, and it was a opportunity for people to really like some of the younger people who were like, well, wait a second, I was born in 1997, so I'm not really sure what's going on here. But by the way, that person might have a really interesting digital idea that they can bring to it and find a way to say, well, you know what would be really cool? You know, I was born in 1997, but I think it would be so cool if Quentin Tarantino hosted a night of movies from the late 60s. Like if he hosted on TMC, if there was like, you know, a programming where movies that were late 60s, early 70s, you know, became a juggernaut for the campaign and things like that. And so any movie has its dare to suck moments, but that's just one example of creating a safe space for people to throw out ideas, some of which went by the wayside and others that created an opportunity for us to land the movie and ended up having a tremendous campaign and in fact winning a couple Academy Awards as well.
Congratulations. So, I do want to have one more question on this, and we'll move on, Andre, which is, how did you get team consensus? What is the method where, you know, you've got a lot of ideas, especially on that one, there were probably hundreds and hundreds. Who makes the final decision, or how do you allow the team to say, this will be the risk decisions we're going to make? How do you get to that?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, everyone has to bring each individual team lead has to sort of use their expertise to say, I believe this is what the best path forward. However, at the end of the day, it's up to people like me and my bosses to really be the decision makers and say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the path forward. And we're going to, you know, some of it might be risky. But at the end of the day, someone has to be accountable and responsible for making a decision. And I think that's what team leads look to their leadership to say, okay, you know, I may not agree with that. I think that path is tricky because we're going to have to pivot eventually or what have you. But that is a heavy load to bear when you're making big decisions like, is this the right release date for the movie? Is, you know, if we're going to the Cannes Film Festival, that means we're getting reviewed. Are the reviews going to kill us or lift us up? You know, is this the right creative direction? Is it going to create controversy that we don't want out in the world? These are all decisions that factor in. There's so many moving parts when you're talking about a movie campaign and all those departments. What is the right time to elevate a media moment? Should we take advantage of a Super Bowl spot, or is that just a waste of money? Because it's so expensive, and $7 million is their return on investment isn't going to be there for a specific title. Can you offset costs with sponsorships? Is there a way to think? You know, one of my bosses had a saying that I thought that has become a motto for me as well, which is to be creatively reckless and fiscally responsible, and that really stuck with me. It is a great one because it means, you know what, go big and go big or go home. Have really big ideas, and then if you have to hone them in, or you have to find partners that can offset costs through sponsorship dollars and other media opportunities, then that's awesome. And that's a new way of thinking. The leadership at Sony was really fiscally responsible and served them all incredibly well. So I'm really proud of all the work my colleagues over there are still doing.
So to me, Andre, it feels like you have always been having to blaze a new trail. every movie is kind of like trailblazing because you're having to make these risk decisions with unknowns, even though you have years and decades of experience. How do you deal with the trailblazing? Is it, hey, I've made the decision, or I'm a consensus? I really believe in consensus. Where does that aspect come in your mindset as a leader with such big dollars on the table?
Yeah, I mean, every movie is really its own brand. I mean, one size doesn't fit all in the movie business. It's not like nothing against toothpaste. Toothpaste matters too. And, you always want to find the emotional core and connection to the consumer. But with so many moving parts in a campaign, someone uh, in leadership needs to be able to say, this is what we're doing, and try to get consensus is, of course, critical. But if there's a squeaky wheel that is not getting their way, and you have to make a tough decision that overrides the squeaky wheel, then that's what's going to happen. And being in leadership can be really painful. It causes conflict, and that's why all those things we talked about at the top, which is being sort of having a high EQ, having being able to be a good listener and collaborate with folks, is all critical. And at the end of the day, a leader has to make tough decisions. As led by experts in their field. So when I was transitioning from publicity, which I ran the publicity department for like 10 years, into marketing, I really there was an insecurity in me that was innate about sort of my abilities. And I came from the world of publicity, which is very detail oriented. The devil is always in the details of so many parts of our business, but certainly publicity. And when I moved to co-run marketing, I tended to stay in my safe zone and really come from the place of publicity because that's what I knew so well. And so there was a growth moment for me where I had to face my own insecurities about, micromanaging and getting into the minutia and really stepping back and having a 360, 30,000 foot view about how to lead a team. And that was a growth moment for me personally. And so, it just takes massaging and getting used to, and then you find your rhythm and hopefully you've created a sense of community with your team. I mean, these are people just like you in your career for so many years. We spend more time often 8, 10, 12, 15, 16 hours with these people. I mean, I think it's really important to dedicate time to developing these relationships with your colleagues. And that doesn't mean breakfast, lunch, and dinner, although that could be the case. But it does mean finding a sense of community and relatability. And that is how leading and laddering up to consensus, it makes things easier when you have to have those tough conversations or getting the leadership above yourself to buy into a conceit or a concept.
I want to first thank you for being so vulnerable about your own experience as you pivoted from PR to marketing, and that you had to learn to let go. And I'd like to just conclude with a bow, if we could. There are up and coming leaders behind us. Not that we're done. We have lots of experience and time ahead of us, we hope. But more importantly, there's wisdom that we've gained of what was and what is ahead of us and how different the world is than just 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Maybe you could summarize to those coming up about, if there are 3 to 5 things you think about to be a trailblazer in the future. Let's give them a final bow, Andre, about, here's my words of the wise to those coming behind me.
Yeah, I would say embrace innovation. I think it's really important to be open to new ideas because they'll just be coming. They'll continue to come. And a good leader that's coming up really needs to be adaptable and accept the failures that are coming as well because they are coming. So do it with grace and move on and take it as a learning sort of moment. And I can't stress enough empathy. I think the return on investment in being empathetic and finding a sense of relatability with your teammates and colleagues is critical. And like I said, spending time with them and really understanding their point of view. And sometimes you have to lean into one's strengths, and they may not be. You might find that someone who's in a position, as that happened to me, I had a lot of mentors in my life that saw something in me and said, he's not great at that, but he'd be really good over there. And being able to see that, and having the foresight to say, this person's a rock star. I mean, I think it's important to be able to, for me, I always prefer to have a B student that has a lot of growth potential to become an A student versus an A student that's an asshole and nobody likes and doesn't get along with and has a big ego that gets in the way. So I think it's important to have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. There's a book called, I think it's called Growth Mindset.
I think it is called Growth Mindset. Yes.
Dweck. Yeah. And, the fixed mindset is like, this is how we do things and we will always do things this way. And that is my comfort level. And I've been here for 10, 15, 20 years and I'm not interested in evolving. But we live in a global world now where, certainly in the movie business, had to really consider how to evolve our business to really consider that China and Asia and LATAM and the rest of the world, there were real financial opportunities there. And how do we use a growth mindset as a leader to lean into new opportunities? And then, of course, as I was saying, I think really leaders need to reflect the world around them. Again, it's good for business and it's the right thing to do. When we have And I grew out of this as well. I was a little blind to it myself, but I think it's so important and it's so good for business to have a diverse points of view in a room, because you and I, Russell, have different points of view and those are our points of view. But the folks that have worked with and for us have different points of view that can be illuminating to any campaign you're working on. And when you give the sort of create an opening for new ideas to be expressed, it only helps the leadership as well. Be flexible in your leadership style, because your stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, you might have to adapt how you're leading. If for me, talking to filmmakers and talent and executives might feel different than talking to my day-to-day sort of teammates. So
I'm hearing the agility, the adaptability, the creativity, the diversity. And what came to my mind as you were speaking is we really, as leaders, are the AI of all the people. We're always worried, AI is going to replace us and we're going to have all the truth is our job is to let the AI of our brains, these incredible, of all those people in a room, come together and do their magic. And we're the connectors, the neural connectors of safety and trust and bond and courage and friendship and honesty and vulnerability that creates magic that a machine can always make better, but there is a certain power that we as leaders create amongst each other. And I think when you describe the Quentin Tarantino, and I think about it as you were really the center network of networking all those brains and allowing all that brain power to come together. And I think I look at you and say, hey, as a trailblazing leader, you understand how to unleash the mindset and the creativity that sits within each other. And I give you the highest respect for your philosophy. And I thank you so much for your time and sharing with us today.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a complete pleasure and honor. And I encourage all those leaders to become storytellers instead of presenters that push buttons. People like stories, and that is what engages customers.
Amen.
So on that, amen. Thank you so much for your leadership and including me in today's conversation.
Thanks
I really appreciate it.
I would like to just summarize today's podcast because I thought Andre hit upon so many important points. I think the first point that was so important was the power of trust within a team and making it a safe place for creative ideas and innovations and conversations to come forward, and to build trust through connection, listening, authentically caring, whether that's sharing a meal, humor, because without trust, there can be no real safe opportunity for innovation. And we're entering a new future where innovation is key. The other key aspect I took away from our podcast was thinking about the role of leader as the neural hub to be in allowing the brain power of everybody in the room to come together and to be building upon one another, and then to be inspiring them to use the new technologies, whether it's AI or whatever it's going to be, and make things even better. And so that you get the compounding effect of both the technology and the brilliance of our brains and our creativity. But it can't happen without trust and safety and humor and joy and passion and listening and engagement. And then ultimately someone, the leader, making the important decisions and tough decisions, and even what you would consider the risk decisions to help the business grow. And as a special gift for today's listeners, I want you to go over to the Kern & Partners website, spelled out kernandpartners.com, and right on the homepage there's a special gift. It is the ultimate collection of the Magnificent Manager Advantage resources. It is jam-packed with important information about the 12 proven behaviors that turn good managers into magnificent managers to increase employee engagement, improve sales and profits, and increase retention, and attract better A talent. So regardless of your role, be sure to download this resource as a special offer. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Trailblazing Leaders Podcast. If you want to check out more episodes, you're going to find them on all major streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, YouTube. The podcast is also available at our website at kernandpartners.com. Thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you on our next episode.